Thank you. Good afternoon. Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Fantastic. I've had an absolute nightmare. I've had an overrunning meeting and then a technological challenge as well, but here we are. So thank you for the invite. As Amal said, I'm a local politician, Labour politician. I've been leader for about 7 or 8 years now, but I also work for an economic think tank called the Democracy Collaborative. It's an international think tank that promotes a more democratic economy. So I'm probably really appearing in the latter role rather than the former role, because I really want to speak about community wealth building and economic democracy. Um, so obviously, I've caught a little of the debate, but not an awful lot due to the multiple challenges I've had with the technology here. But I want to really talk about community wealth building and how I think the question of our age is really around our economy and who benefits from it, who owns it, and how wealth flows. And obviously, it's been my position for some time that what we need to do locally and regionally, as much as we can, is to try to promote a more shared, equitable, and democratic economy. So obviously, I've been leader for 7 or 8 years now, but I've also been a local politician for too long to remember in many ways. But you know, my eyes really open to this through a couple of things. Firstly, seeing how about 10 or 15 years ago in Preston, how we were told that the only way we could do economic development was really to hold hands with corporate developers. So we were sold that idea for from the late 90s, really, until it all fell apart, really, after that investment didn't come. And the selling point was, if we put our land into a publicly owned vehicle with, large global developers, then we will get regeneration, we will get jobs, we will get cinemas, restaurants, housing, and the rest of it. And from our perspective, it was a really failed project because there was a dynamic where, there's a dynamic where it was really difficult to get the scheme off the ground. But additionally, there was issues around semi-privatisation of land, issues around the exclusion of local companies, and also at the time the fallout from the economic crisis of 2007 onwards. So obviously, when we took control as a Labour council again in 2011, I was skirting around for ideas around how to do things differently. And I must say, trying to have a more democratic economy in the culture that we have in this country, it's the hardest thing in the world because in terms of economic development, in terms of the culture, the media, and other things. We're told it has to be a certain way, it has to be free market, it has to be neoliberal, and that alternatives are not available to us. But the inspiration I saw was especially reading around the about some of the European local economies you see in parts of Emilia Romagna or you see in Mondragon in Spain, where they've managed to actually put a lot more democracy in the economy, especially through expanding and supporting worker-owned businesses and employee-owned businesses and other forms of cooperatives. And the work we came across from the Democratic Collaborative was something called the Cleveland model, which was in Cleveland, Ohio, in America, where they got the big not-for-profit institutions, the museums, the not-for-profit hospitals, the universities, to basically purchase a lot more locally, but especially purchase a lot more from new worker-owned cooperatives. And in Cleveland, Ohio, if you read about the evergreen cooperatives, what you see is 400 or 500 jobs that have been basically brought into employee ownership, worker ownership, just through the purchasing decisions of the local not-for-profit institutions there. So obviously, in Preston, 10 or 15 years ago, we faced a situation where big business didn't want to invest. We faced austerity because we're a very diverse working class community, and the austerity cuts we saw at the time from the Tory Lib Dem government were something we'd never seen. And then we faced a failure of a conventional economic approach as well. So what we did is we did several things. We became the first living wage employer in the north of England, and we've worked across our public and private sectors. So there's 4,200 people out of a workforce of I think 60 or 70,000 that have had a pay rise through living wage accreditation. We did things like bring back a credit union. We realised that just relying on inward investment alone wasn't doing it for our community, so we worked with our public sector institutions to buy a lot more from locally based companies, and we managed to spend an extra 75 million with locally based companies. We used our planning system to make sure on larger developments to use local suppliers and labour. We worked with our public pension fund to invest more directly within Preston and South Ribble, which is a neighbouring council. And then very recently, in the last, say, 5 years, really, we've gone towards trying to democratise our economy, which means that instead of working with corporate developers, we're refurbishing our bus station, our museum, building cinemas, providing small business spaces in local municipal ownership. We're working with partners to establish a regional cooperative bank across the region, and we're doing well with that. It's actually in the process of obtaining a banking license because we're still mindful of the economic crash and how, economies like Germany and other countries which have more democratic financial institutions weather the storm a lot better. We've got about 8, 9, 10 new worker-owned businesses. We've got new employee-owned businesses. We've got cooperative housing projects. We've got community land trusts. We've got a cooperative digital business, which we hope can provide free broadband for residents. We've got community energy schemes. We've done insourcing. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to really strengthen our local economies in Preston by having a more democratic economy and using all these levers. And it's hard work because local government and regional government in this country is very restricted. It's very centralised compared to other countries. But where we're very excited about it is how we're bringing these new forms of economic democracy and trying to get community support for them. So obviously we're trying to encourage our residents to move to the new bank we're setting up. We're working with our South Asian community, for example, around new worker ownership. We're working with former female prisoners around worker ownership. We're working with community centres around looking at a worker-owned retrofit cooperative. And we're also working with trade unions. So, for example, we're exploring with the GMB union if we can look to establish an alternative to Uber, which will be a worker-owned platform based on some best practice in Denver, Colorado, and New York, where they actually have these alternatives, which are not scaled to the degree which they could be, but there's potential. So obviously, I remain very excited by the work we're doing, but additionally, community wealth building, it's become an international movement. So, and a movement in the UK. So, for example, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has an anchor institution network which brings together all the public sector institutions to spend locally as much as they can and promote a London living wage. And that has basically seen, I think, £73 billion worth of purchasing power collaborate around how they can support their small business community and promote a London living wage. You've got the Scottish Parliament, for example, which is establishing community wealth building legislation. You've got Liverpool City region with Mayor Steve Rotherham that's done a land commission to look at community land trusts. You've got ownership hubs in London, Sheffield and Greater Manchester, which are promoting employee and worker ownership. And you've even got the National Health Service, which calls itself an anchor institution. So in the Constitution, they look at where they can purchase, who they employ, can they employ people from the most deprived communities, what they do with the land and assets, can they provide social and affordable housing and renewable energy generation on the land and assets, and other things, really. So it's very exciting, the fact that community wealth building and economic democracy, from not being discussed anywhere 15 or 20 years ago, has managed to really take off in this country, both locally, regionally and nationally, but also internationally, because there's interest in America, South Korea, Australia. I was in Sweden a couple of months back looking at similar things. And I think it brings a question to all of us, because obviously, society is very divided at the moment. And I think one of the issues that we do have that is leading to that division is just that people are struggling so much economically. And they're struggling so much economically because they have very little agency in their working lives, either as consumers, as homeowners, as tenants, or especially as workers within the workforce. And I think that is leading to some of the social problems we have. So obviously, with community wealth building, you have an architecture for a new, more democratic economy, which you can argue will move beyond traditional capitalism to a different system that's more democratic and fair and is concentrated on ownership. But the challenges is that though there's been brilliant work in many places, it's still not at the scale that it needs to be. So within Preston, obviously, we're a very small council and we've done so much, but for me, it's still not where it needs to be. And I think other areas that have adopted community wealth building, again, it really needs to be the main way of doing economic development, but at the moment it isn't. So there's a conversation about how we can actually build that new economy, but it needs everyone, whether it's campaigners, community organisations, trade unions, faith organisations, small businesses, and especially politicians to actually support this, really. Because I think community wealth building and the issue of democracy in the economy is the one that could really bring our society and our communities together. But at the moment, it's seen as something that is good, but is on the margins. But I think it needs to be in the mainstream of everything, really. So again, big apologies for the. My girlfriend always calls me a boomer, who's much younger than me, and I think that's probably one reason why I didn't get the technology working so much. But apologies for the technological problems and being a little late. But obviously, please do ask any questions that you want. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Brilliant. Yeah. Um, you know, things things happen. The technology is never where we want it to be. Yeah, questions. Questions from the room. I think yes, Neri, go for it.
Thank you very much, Matthew. That's super interesting. Really appreciate you talking us through it. What I don't know if this is a question that kind of goes against the whole ethos of community wealth building, but what do you think national government should be doing to make community wealth building easier and more impactful and to like unleash it further?
It's a very good question. I think if we actually had the same powers we maybe had as councils in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even similar powers to, say, European or even American cities, that would help. I mean, if you go to Berlin, for example, you can actually choose to introduce rent controls. You can choose to municipalize the water supply and other things, which they have done. We just don't have these powers to that degree here. And I believe that maybe we should. I mean, there's some obviously welcome things that we're seeing from the new Labour government, like, allowing councils to establish bus companies. But I do think it needs to go a lot further, to really get back to what we might have had 50 years ago. And I think one of the reasons we've had such an imposition of neoliberal economics, which has been so damaging to many, is because, local government's been restricted. I mean, it was always Tony Benn who said that, first he went for the trade unions and very shortly afterwards, they went for local government, and local government could, say 50 or 60 years ago, just build 2 or 3 council houses, and they didn't need, to ask government to do it. They could get the finance to do that. We just can't do things at that scale anymore. So obviously, I basically think that, we need to get back to that as well. But also, I think we need governments to really support community wealth building at scale. Now, obviously, we have policies at the moment to double the size of the cooperative economy. All good. But I do think we need to just bring this to scale everywhere, to be honest. And government needs to support that, and it needs to empower regional mayors, devolved assemblies, councils to do that. But before it happens, we just need more people to accept this is the best way to do economic development, really. Because at the moment, I don't think that is the case. It's often very conventional. There's often might be good reasons for that because you want to see jobs straight away. I want to use the growth to redistribute wealth in other ways. But, I just think if you look at the extent of the privatisation, deregulation and demutualisation that we've had, it's been worse than anywhere in Europe, in our country pretty much, in the former European Union. And across the world, it's probably been one of the worst, apart from maybe America and maybe New Zealand, in terms of that experiment. It's been nowhere as bad as Scandinavia, even France or Germany. So one of the reasons I think we're having so many problems in terms of tensions in communities is just down to our economic model and how it's structured, and the fact that working people often don't have that agency that they might have had, say, in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, or even 80s to a little degree. Not that things were perfect back then, because there were faults with it, but you did have councils who owned bus companies and could build housing at scale. You did have a very large cooperative sector, for example, through the cooperative group, largest grocer. You did have a building society movement. You had 70% of people, 60% of people in trade unions 50 years ago. That is miles away now. And I think, obviously, we need to not go back to the past, but just realise that in terms of, the agency working people have in the local economies and lives, and generally, it's just really been diminished so much. And I think community wealth building is one of the answers how we can get it back if it's brought to scale and supported.
Thank you. Ruth?
Can you say a bit more about community energy? Because, for fuel poverty action, that's a critical thing. And we know that there are obstacles to people actually selling locally what is produced locally. They're supposed to sell it all into the national grid. Are you resisting that, and how?
Well, we've got Community Energy Preston, and it's just begun. The way that they're doing it is there's going to be a share offer where I think they're going to raise money, but additionally, what they're going to do is they're going to actually work with our anchor institutions. So they're going to be commissioned by the local college, by the cooperative group, I think by another organisation to actually put the panels on there, which will make it more sustainable. So that's where we are with how we're doing it in Preston. And obviously, it's probably not as advanced as some areas in London, where I know it's a lot more advanced. But additionally, what we are doing is we're supporting a worker-owned retrofitting firm. Now, what we're trying to do with that, and that's in one of our working class communities where there's lots of social housing, and it's actually a community centre which is actually branched out into business through this new worker cooperative. Now, what we're trying to do is persuade the local housing providers, for example, to purchase from this new worker cooperative, right? And if that does happen, if they can win a contract, say, worth £1 million, the 3 or 4 people that we have working in it now, that'll be 20 or 30. So it's trying to use the purchasing power of the public institutions to expand the democratic economy in Preston. And again, it's probably not something you'll hear from most council leaders talking about this, but the problem we have within communities like Preston is that the free market experiment's just been devastating for us. We had manufacturing industry in the 60s, 70s, 80s. So much as that's gone. A lot of the council housing that we've had, that's gone as well. And yes, many of the former estates are really struggling in terms of deprivation. So this is why we're looking at systemic change, really, to try and, bring us out of that. But as I said, we're very restricted centrally by government. Local government's always been that way since probably the 80s. But we're trying to probably get around it by looking at new institutions through new cooperatives and community energy projects and setting up our own bank as a cooperative with partners and other things to try and get out of that straitjacket, if that makes sense, because, it really is very restrictive for the kind of social change that we want to see.
Do you have power station, that the movement of people putting solar on their own roof? You've probably heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, that the community energy scheme, we expect it will do that as well. So individuals who want to put solar panels on their houses, it will offer that service. But we're starting institutionally. We're starting with the anchor institutions first. So there'll be a share offer, but for it to actually try and get it to scale, we're trying to get the local co-op, local further education colleges to actually commission them, which they are doing.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Matthew. And I'm curious to hear, like, sort of practically, how do you get all of these people together? So it sounds like, you kind of on the one hand, you've kind of created some sort of friendly institutions who are already, whose ear you already have on what you're trying to do. And then on the other, you sort of it sounds like you have to do maybe quite a lot of bargaining, or of someone, and that's it sounds like maybe that's kind of how you started to get some of these companies to reinvest in the community a lot more than they were doing. And I'm kind of curious to hear like what practically that looked like for you, or that continues to look like. And there is, it sounds like there are like some success stories. There's some people that are not receptive at all.
Yeah, as I said, we started it by doing simple things. Like we came across the living wage movement, which was it's pretty second nature now, but it was exciting at the time seeing the work in London where the unions got together with churches, mosques, and the wider community to demand a real living wage. So we got behind that first, and then we worked with other partners to do it. So that was one of the first things we did. We then started looking at purchasing. So we thought, well, quite a small council, but we could bring it to scale if we get the county council, the university, the hospital, further education colleges to buy locally from independent businesses as much as possible. So we did that, and that was very successful. And the reason we went public sector is just because attracting the private sector to the scale we tried before through the conventional means, whether it was right or wrong, it just hadn't worked. So it wasn't like an anti-business agenda. It's just doing what was practically best. And also, additionally, if you talk about a university and hospital like a conventional firm, it can't relocate. It's always going to be anchored in place. So we did that, and then we took a decision to regenerate our city centre primarily in municipal ownership. So, we've used land for charitable use zone. We've done up our Harris Museum. We've built a publicly owned cinema. We're developing a small business hub. A political choice to do that in public ownership. So this is something we could do. And some of these also get a return as well. And then the rest of it is putting new democratic systems in place, whether it's a community land trust, cooperative housing scheme that we have with our traveller community, for example, setting up a vehicle to provide broadband, looking at worker and employee ownership, working to establish a cooperative bank with partners. It's trying to put new layers of economic democracy in there, which may sound radical, but it's not. A lot of these things are very, very common sense. I think the way that we've done things or been told we have to do things economically in the last 30 or 40 years have not been very common sense. If you go to some of the regions if you read about the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation, what you have there is a network of 120 worker-owned businesses. There's established the Catholic Church in the 50s, and it's grown to having a turnover of nearly 20 billion euros, right? And whenever they come to places like Britain and America, they think the way that we do economics and economic development is not common sense, and the way that they do it is, because they actually have that democracy and decision-making process over their own economic destiny, really. So I've gone on a bit with that. I've probably digressed a little from your original question. But obviously, we started with the practical things. We still do the practical things. And then it was really doing new things where we're trying to get more economic democracy within the community, really. And doing it because it's just the right thing to do, really. Because I think we've got to really tackle the ownership issue within Preston. And I say it's hard to do. You've got to do it gently, bit by bit, because of obviously the barriers that you face. But you can start making a bit of a difference by growing the cooperative economy, for example, which is good in terms of public health as well. The more co-ops, social enterprises, social businesses you have, it is good for people's physical and mental health, as well as economically as well.
Thank you. Ruth, do you want to come back in? Oh, yeah.
It sounds really exciting, and I wonder, are people really excited? Like, is there a whole spirit in the town? Like, oh my God, we're doing it, and people wanting to volunteer for stuff, and loads of.
There's well, the people involved in it are very excited, and there's many people involved in it. However, the wider Preston populace, I would say many people don't necessarily know that much about it just because they're going about the day-to-day lives. So a big part of what we're doing is try to convince more people in the community to get involved in it, because obviously people have difficult lives, they have hard lives, they're just working from day to day. They're not necessarily thinking about worker and employee ownership every single day. But I think there's a feeling just generally in the town at this moment in time, of the city, sorry, that collectively we are being lifted up through a collective like regeneration effort more generally, But as I said, there is cynicism in towards politicians at all levels, I'm afraid, and that is still there in Preston as well. But, the figures we have around living wage employment, we've been one of the best in the county of Lancashire for many years. In terms of providing new social and affordable housing in the last few years, we've been the best out of the county of Lancashire. And just things like doing a lot better for a traditionally deprived community in terms of, stopping the acceleration of child poverty, and recently improving in the index of multiple deprivation. And I believe it's this approach that's helped that along, really. But does everyone know it's going on and understand it and want to be part of it in Preston? No, they don't. But what you do have is lots of people that are doing this. And the more we can bring it to scale, if we can, that is where the change is going to come in.
Thank you. Jaya, you want to come in?
Yeah, the question also what I brought in before. What do you think that this crisis is impossible to resolve and to survive within and maintaining the monetary world system or the global financial system because of its wealth distribution and the companies and the competition and the military competition?
So yes, I mean I understand your position. However, what I'm trying to do is look at what we can do locally and regionally. And there are some very good examples of where you've had some very strong elements of economic democracy locally and regionally that the outcomes have been very good. So even in, say, somewhere like North Dakota, which is a Republican state in America, because they have a publicly owned bank, they managed to, avoid recessions and get unemployment down just because the banking system there is publicly owned. If you look at the German banking system, when you had the 2007, 8, 9 financial crash, because the majority of German banks are either cooperative, not-for-profit, or public. They're actually lending to local businesses whilst the large banks were being bailed out by the taxpayer. And again, if you read about Bologna in Emilia-Romagna, you read about the Quebec social economy, or you read about Mondragon, where they managed to really expand the democratic economy. Again, they actually managed to find a way to avoid those global shocks internationally, really. So, it is tough business, and I'll probably say the words, neoliberal experiment, which is something that we've had, and obviously was started in the late 70s, and planned before that, as you know, by Margaret Thatcher and others. But I do think within all of that, there's stuff you can do locally, and I think if you start getting some community support for it, it can actually make a big difference. There's always a question about the scale it's at, but I think you can potentially do something special in one place and one region, but you need people to support it and get behind it, really.
Thank you. Mary?
Yeah, thank you. I was struck by what you were saying about chasing kind of external private investment, and by the comparison I often hear, by how it compares to something I often hear about developing global South countries that are often sort of continually chasing foreign direct investment, or in other cases having to extract large amounts of their kind of natural resources to export overseas because there's not as much value creation and kind of complex economic activity happening there. So there's almost a search to find it from the outside. And I was wondering if you have cases of this kind of community wealth building model being applied in the global South in the same way that you've described it in Preston and other places in the North.
There's been interest from it in the global South, but I don't think it's been applied to the degree that's needed. There was some interest in Zimbabwe, but I do hear. I mean, there's an MP who came up to Preston about 7 or 8 years ago because he was showing interest in what we're doing from Zimbabwe, and he was telling me. So I don't know whether this is true or not. It probably is, but he's telling me some stories about how, especially in the global South, the conditions on receiving international aid in some instances I've been on the condition you basically got to privatise your banking system, for example, and how doing that really did not improve the well-being of the community, actually made it worse, So this is why they're interested in. He's very much interested in the fact we want to set up our own bank, because he was saying, yeah, we want a cooperative bank in here, so we can be more resilient. We can decide our own destinies a lot more. And then he was very much interested in things like sugar cooperatives, because sugar production was in his town or city was a big thing, So yeah, these it's just basically democratic cooperative economies, community wealth building. It can be cooperative ownership, it can be public ownership, it can even things like credit unions, but trying to have things that are a bit of an alternative to the corporate capitalism we're used to, and trying to get that to predominate, so you crowd out capitalism to a degree. And then by doing that, obviously, you do have more economic democracy. That is the idea behind it. And I say if you do read about Mondragon, they do within that, I know it's only one small town in Spain, but they have created a very different system to the one that we're all used to. So this idea we can't do it, it's wrong, we can, and I think we've got to take examples of it and try to bring that inspiration everywhere, really.
Very inspiring, thank you.
Thank you. Ruth, I see that you're unmuted. Did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I just wondered what the involvement of women is, because often a lot of community things are actually led by women, and I didn't know if that was the case in Preston.
No, it's an excellent question, actually. The living wage stuff we did at first, a lot of that was aimed at women, because they tend to be disproportionately in low-paid jobs, as we all know. So that was really in my mind when we did that. But we have, for example, a women-led organisation. It's called the Mandala Centre. So it's like a well-being studio, yoga and all the rest of it. And I think it was 15 women there, but they might have one man now. So, but obviously, totally women or primarily women. And they become worker-owned, and they also pay themselves a minimum wage of £17 an hour, and they have that democracy over the jobs they want. There's also Deeds Not Words, which is former prisoners that have established a cooperative. I'm not sure if it's actually at the scale we'd like, but they are doing things like, as they're going back into the community, they got a stall on our markets, and they're selling T-shirts and other things to help them get back into the world of work. And then there's things like Lady Boss, where we're working with our South Asian community, mainly Muslim women, to establish a worker cooperative around like catering business. Now, if we could then get our university, for example, to use that as a supplier, again, the few people in there could be dozens, if not hundreds, if they want a major contract. So it's that transformative vision that we do have in Preston. At the moment in time, this is what we want to do, really. And women are a huge part of it, to be honest. Yeah.
Thanks. Not surprised.
Alison?
I was just wondering if you'd come across the universal basic income movement and idea within Preston.
We have, and we passed a motion saying that if we had a devolution deal, we'd like it to be considered as part of that devolution deal. And I think it was Mark Drakeford's Welsh government that were looking to trial it with care leavers or something. But, I think realistically that isn't going to happen. But if it did, it's something we want to do. But to do that, we need government funding to pay for the trial. And, I just don't think that's going to happen at this moment in time, even though it's a good idea. So I've heard of it. We do like the idea of it. But I think we don't really want to concentrate on what we can practically do at this moment in time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. And a colleague of mine raised that there was a debate today in the Scottish Parliament about a community wealth building bill. Or have you heard about this?
I just mentioned it just before.
Sorry.
Amal, yeah. As I said, when I said, well, a lot of it's happened in Preston, but it's happening in many places. They're bringing legislation in to adopt community wealth building. So basically, every council and the Scottish Government will look to adopt community wealth building. Again, I don't feel it goes strong enough. I don't think it's as strong as it should be. I mean, there's Richard Leonard at MSP, for example. He's making arguments that the Scottish National Investment Bank should be a publicly owned bank, or a public bank that would support things like transitions to worker and employee ownership. I think we need that within the legislation, and I know we might be considering an amendment to suggest that. But it is a step forward. The fact that we have a devolved parliament that is introducing legislation to support community wealth building. And there has been an expansion of community energy, community ownership, especially of Scottish Islands, and additionally things like employee ownership in Scotland. So, it's going in the right direction there. But with all these things, I just want politicians, whoever they are, whatever party, to take these ideas further.
Yeah, Ruth?
Is there any way to include asylum seekers and people who aren't UK citizens? Is there any work going on that?
There's been some in Preston, yeah. I mean, we do have a number of asylum seekers in Preston, and I think there was discussion about how we could help them establish cooperatives. So it was being looked at. I'm not sure it's at the scale we want in Preston, but that's something we're looking at. We're also, as I said, through the ideas we have around whether we can get this platform for America to, look at an alternative to Uber, because if you ever do get an Uber, which I don't do an awful lot, but on the times that I have done, it's generally people from the minority communities who work there. And obviously, I would argue that there's fairer models than Uber. I should imagine many of the people who work within the gig economy, and I should imagine the people who do work within the gig economy are immigrants and asylum seekers. So I think they need economic democracy as much as other people do, because I would suggest they're probably more, open to exploitation by companies often. So yeah, I mean, community wealth building can involve anyone really.
Thank you, Matthew. Do we have any final burning questions? If not, I think it might be time to close the session. Okay, in that case, let's leave it there. Thank you everyone for being here, for listening, and for participating in the session. And a special thank you as well to Nuri and Matthew for your hefty contributions tonight and making it so informative, really. Just a final word on what we do at Fuel Poverty Action. For those of you who don't know, we're campaigning for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to cover needs like adequate heating, lighting, cooking through our Energy for All campaign. You can take action and support that by signing our manifesto that I'm going to link in the chat. And also, I'm going to put in a link there as well yes, thank you, Stu, for if you're not already, to become a member of Fuel Poverty Action, and also let us know how you found the session.
And we're having our AGM on the 11th of December. If people are interested to come along.
Thank you, Ruth. Is that open? That's open to everyone?
There's a business session from 7:30, from 6:30 to 7. That's not open to everyone, but then from 7 to 8 it is.
Super. 11th of December, 7 to 8.
Get in touch if you're interested in coming.
Awesome. Thanks for that.
And if you're not on our mailing list.
Great. And that's that would be at fuelpovertyaction.org. Fuelpovertyaction@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Everyone, if everyone wants to unmute themselves and turn their videos on, give us a wave, say good evening. and I'll see you very soon.
Thanks very much.
See you now.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.